Hello and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Austin Petersen here. Today is Monday, November the 14th, and it is the first Monday after Election Day. And so I am back on the Freedom Watch. Just took a few days off. The last few days, if you hadn't heard from me, I was taking a little vacation just to get away after all the craziness of the election. I needed some time with some friends to have some fun. Went to climb some mountains in Colorado. Got to meet with some friends, though. I had a little event on Saturday night with the lovely Karen Harlos and several people who came to attend a little private get together that we had in Denver, which was really nice and fun, and I enjoyed it. It's good for the soul. And got back to Kansas City late last night and did some reading and some research and some looking around just to see what people were talking about in the election, see if there was still violence going on around the country caused by leftists who cannot accept the outcome of the election. Probably the most hilarious to me are the protesters who are in New York who are standing up against Donald Trump, who didn't bother to vote. And they are protesting the outcome of an election which they did not take part in, which is just, I mean, it's just delicious, right? Because the funny thing is that, I've got a lot of friends who are on the left, and they are crying tears of rage and hatred, and they're spewing all of these pejoratives, racist, sexism, homophobia, misogyny, and like, oh, this is what's won in this election. Well, yes, in a sense, but not because of necessarily because of the racism, the sexism, the bigotry, the homophobia of the conservatives or the Republican Party, but because of the bigotry of the left. Actually, the truth is that Donald Trump won because the left are the hateful bigots that they paint the right out to be, and because it's broadly acceptable to be a racist or to be a bigot as a Democrat. It's perfectly legitimate. It's perfectly fine, and nobody's going to necessarily attack you over that. And it's only if you're a Republican white male that it's not okay to be racist or bigoted, xenophobic, whatever it is that you will, because this election turned on the issue of political correctness. And I got some harsh words for my fellow libertarians this morning to talk about on the issue of political correctness. And I think that I get to have a say in this. The reason why I think I get to be an authority on the subject is because I think that you can divide in the conservative movement. You can divide up those people who were genuinely racist, the people who are genuinely bigoted, the people who are genuinely xenophobic, versus the broad swath of the people who voted for Donald Trump, who were not bigoted, racist, homophobic, and who were sick to tired, or even if they were a little bit, it didn't matter because the left was just so repugnant in this year's election. It shouldn't be seen as necessarily some broad mandate for Trump because, again, remember, both of these candidates were so despised, so hated, right? So Trump shouldn't see this as some kind of mandate or necessarily great victory for his cause. It was simply a lesser of two evils. That's what won in this election. But you know what? The thing was that the Libertarian Party just didn't have the right read on the election. They didn't have the right read on the electorate in order to put together a coalition that could win. And, interestingly enough, it seems as if the Bill Weld strategy in this was just to torpedo Trump. Well, if he wanted to torpedo Trump, then he should have supported his own ticket more, because I'm reading an article on the Washington Post this morning, and it's very insightful, and it's the kind of thing, it's got the facts and the numbers and the statistics that you're going to want. So I'm going to read this to you up front, and then on the back end, I'm going to talk about the cultural issues, the ones that are a little less easy to quantify, but which I believe was the great missed opportunity for libertarians in this election because of the Johnson candidacy. And we'll talk about that later on the show. But the first thing is, let's talk about the facts, the numbers, the stats. I want to make sure we're always being as objective as possible here on my podcast, because I'm biased. Excuse me. This is live, so I can't cut any of this. Too bad. But I want to be as objective as possible when analyzing these things. And it's really, really difficult because, of course, if you had a bias towards liberty, then you're going to have a bias there. But you want to try and be objective so that we can actually move forward with our ideas in using logic and reason, even though we should be cognizant of emotions, right? Because, again, logic and reason are how we arrive at our policy points. but they should not be how we arrive at our presentation and our marketing. Because again, libertarians being on the end of the spectrum where we prize reason and logic, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the American people want, right? They want the bombastic approach. They voted for the guy who had all of the trappings of masculinity. And we can debate all day long whether that masculinity is real or false, and we'll talk about that later in the show when we talk about the cultural issues. But there's a difference between how you form your policy perspective versus how you form your marketing for your campaign, okay? Because again, most people, in terms of winning elections, it's about style. It's about class. It's about how you pull off your debates and your rhetoric. And it's 90% not what you say, how you say it. Again, these are the things we'll get into later in the show. But first of all, let's talk about how Bill Weld was helping Hillary, even though he didn't know he was helping Hillary, but it wasn't enough. Listen to this. This is interesting. This is Sasha Volok from the Washington Post. And he says that they say Gary Johnson is slightly good for Hillary, and this data is consistent. Listen to this. The 9% of Democrats or 10% of liberals who voted for Trump are a larger group than Johnson and Stein voters put together. Okay? So there were 9% or 10% of Democrats or liberals who actually voted for Trump, and that's more than the amount of people who voted for Johnson or Stein. Now listen to this. Clinton has about 47.7% of the popular vote. So let's hold her constant by comparing the outcome to the day when that was her projected vote share at 538, October 3rd. All right. So on the October 3rd projection, Clinton was at 47.7, Trump at 43.9, with 7 points for Johnson. But the outcome was 47 Clinton, 47 Trump, and 3.3 Johnson. So if you compare those two, Johnson lost 3.7 points and Trump gained 3.5. That looks like the hypothesis that Johnson's support was heavily soft GOP and it went home. The reasonable guess about what should have happened if Johnson's support had fallen further is a larger net gain to Trump. So what happened was you saw that a lot of these supporters most likely came from Johnson went to Trump. Okay, now why do we think that this went from Johnson to Trump? Of course, my argument is that when Bill Weld went out there and said he was vouching for Hillary Clinton, I think that drove a lot of Johnson's supporters to Trump. I think actually what's amazing is that Bill Weld, who said that his most important thing that he was trying to do was to stop Trump, ended up helping Trump more than anything. Because look at these voters actually went to Trump from Johnson. This is what's postulated here at the Volok Conspiracy, which is a pretty great blog on the Washington Post. The final 538 poll average the day before the election was this, okay? Clinton had 48.5, Trump 45.0, Johnson 5.0. Outcome, Clinton 47.7, Trump 47.4, Johnson 3.3. Now, where did the polls go wrong? Clinton, a minus 0.8. Trump, it was actually 2.4% higher, and Johnson, it was negative 1.7 lower, right? There's no way to read that as Johnson's last-minute loss of a third of his support helped Clinton. It can only be interpreted as Johnson's last-minute loss of a third of his support helped Trump. It's absurd to look at that and think that, oh, if only Johnson had fallen to zero, Clinton would have won. So Trump was going to win either way. Now, listen to this. In the exit polls, they found that Johnson drew 2% of Republicans, 1% of Democrats, and 6% of independents. And independents split about 48 to 42 for Trump. So if we imagine Johnson away and we send all those voters home, the final result is still 0.4% to Trump. Put another way, even at the end, Johnson held Trump's vote down by 0.4%. Not enough. Okay? So a calculation has been going around to claim that to prove that Johnson and Stein cost Clinton the election. Now it's CNN, Vanity Fair pushing this. Now what they're doing is they're allocating 100% of Stein's vote and 50% of Johnson's to Clinton to show that she would have won under those conditions. 50% is the nod toward recognizing that not all of Johnson's voters were plausible Clinton voters. So what happens to the other 50% of Johnson's voters, you ask? They don't say, presumably because they know it would sound absurd. The truth is it stays with Johnson. The counterfactual here is, what if a bunch of third-party voters defected to Clinton and none defected to Trump? if you send Stein's voters entirely to Clinton and split Johnson's 50-50 between Clinton and Trump, it's not enough. Clinton still loses. Now, why did Clinton lose? Well, because people are tired of corruption. They saw Donald Trump, whether you believe it or not, and you can say what you want about his picking up of Priebus or bringing in Steve Bannon, a lot of the people like Newt Gingrich, Rudy Giuliani, the neoconservatives, the establishment Republican Party members that are now being picked to go with the cabinet. I mean, and we're going to talk about the libertarians for Trump at the very, very end because it's so interesting. Now the libertarians for Trump are who are the real libertarians, I guess you might consider them. They're the ones who supported Trump because of what he stated his policies were, and now we see that, well, you had to know that he was going to have to pick some of these establishment types because the establishment types that supported him, people like Newt Gingrich, people like who else in the GOP? I mean, Ben Carson, I guess I wouldn't call him really establishment per se, but Reince Priebus for sure. These are the people who were going to be in Trump's cabinet. Again, we'll talk about this again before we get into the inner struggle. I want to talk about, like, on the macro picture, what really differentiated Trump and Johnson was the type of strategy that Trump ran that I was planning on running as well, which is the sort of antithesis to the kind of campaign that Gary Johnson ran. He ran on being a centrist. He ran on being the sane voice in the room. Well, guess what, Governor? That wasn't the right strategy. The people didn't want the sanest voice in the room. They wanted somebody who was going to throw a brick through the window of the establishment and bring down the elite. I read this fantastic article the other day on Cracked, and it's way too long for me to read to you guys, but it talks about the difference between red state, blue state. It's not between red and blue, okay? The argument between this election was about rural versus urban. Okay, and if you look at any of these major motion pictures that are very popular today, you'll see these common themes in our modern literature, which is film and of course, books and things like that. But in the modern literature, what kind of hero stories do we like nowadays? We like the Hunger Games, where it's us versus the capital. It's we the people, right? The generic common farmers in the districts. If you watch the Hunger Games, you know what I'm talking about here. It's the regular common people in the districts versus the shining capital, the people who wear funky, funny clothes and hats and live in the capital, who are removed from what's happening out there in the flyover country that they call it. And these people who live in these states, which is, again, this is a pejorative against the people who live where I live in what they call flyover country. But I'm proud of my home's country. But these people voted for Donald Trump. They wanted the underdog to win. They were sick to death of being force-fed establishment-type characters, and they saw in Trump someone who was willing to kick ass and take names. He was easy to lionize, okay? You couldn't lionize Gary Johnson because despite all of his Iron Man credentials, despite his climbing Mount Everest credentials, the guy came off as a weenie. He just did. Listen, you can climb every mountain from here to Timbuktu and Kathmandu. But if you whine like a social justice warrior when somebody uses the term illegal immigrant, you're going to get your ass kicked in 2016. Now, a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, Austin, didn't you call people racist, bigots, and xenophobes?" Listen, bro, we'll get into this in a little inner struggle. And we know for a long time that there have been a lot of, Nazis and creepy creeps hiding under rocks in the libertarian movement. Those people moved over to the Trump campaign, thank goodness. But they wanted to come back and say, "Oh, you guys aren't libertarian because, you don't believe it, because you believe in open borders, or you believe in libertarian things." Oh, yeah, no crap. That's why we're libertarians. On a policy level, I had more in common with Johnson than I did with Trump. But it doesn't effing matter. Because if you cannot present an image to the American people that you will be the next commander-in-chief and you will protect American interests, you will never be the commander-in-chief. What libertarians in my primary, what the libertarians didn't like about me in my primary is what the American people want. Now, I hate to call people foolish. I hate to call people idiots, but it does tend to roll off the tongue when you see the people out there on Reddit, for example, in the Libertarian Forum, who are a bunch of effete Johnsonites, people who will make you bake the cake out of their own expedience. These are the people who will sell out libertarian principles to leftists because they think that somehow that the Bernie bros are going to come on board. That was the wrong strategy the whole time, my friends. The wrong strategy the whole time. The leftists and the social justice warriors were never going to come on board simply because you wanted to make the Jew bake the Nazi cake. It was a mistake. And when the policy when the policy debate turned to foreign policy and immigration, Donald Trump just steamrolled our candidate. Steamrolled. Because Donald Trump took a tough approach. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with him. It was about his persona. Because whether or not his policies were right, the American people felt like Donald Trump was going to look out for their interests, fighting for the little guy. That's the message. That's not centrism. That's populism. And libertarian has some aspects of populism to it. It's not egalitarian. Sorry if I'm using big words for some of you guys. Egalitarian meaning, a view of equality amongst all people, right? Libertarianism has aspects of egalitarianism in it, right? Equality, but really it's equality before the law. And it also has aspects of elitism to it, right? So since we are not all necessarily created equal, then equality is like this sort of utopian myth that people who are especially socialists or communists believe that government can make us all equal. But libertarians understand that people who are equal are not free, and people who are free are not equal. But in terms of selling the message, the libertarians have populist aspects to our message: equality before the law, an end to cronyism, an end to corruption. So attacking Hillary Clinton on all of these things could have held Gary's vote from going to Trump. You could have out-Trumped Trump this election, and that's what the problem is that even if you're not an anti-global, even if you're a globalist libertarian, even if you're more towards the open border spectrum of libertarianism, you can still push a message that is a libertarian message that still has aspects of it that are nationalist in some sense, right? You need to have a disease check, you need to have a security check, and then you're done. Right? There's a way to propose that without chastising a reporter like Johnson did for using the term illegal immigrant. I mean, he's like, that's offensive. That's offensive. I mean, that's why we lose. That is why we lost. Because the alt-right were tired of being called bigots and racists. They were tired of all of these people who were looking down on them. Right? It's because Trump had the qualities that our candidate did not, which the American people demand: masculinity, bravado, and courage. And here's the thing: masculinity, bravado, and courage, you don't have to necessarily be a man to display that, FYI, just so you know. Because there have been plenty of badass female prime ministers around the world. Golda Meir, the Iron Lady. There have been fantastic heads of state who have been prime ministers. We haven't had a president yet. But again, the bravado and the courage of the Iron Lady is, to me, Margaret Thatcher. That's leadership. That's what the British people wanted. That's why she was elected. But the problem is libertarians don't like that. You know why? Because it reeks of paternalism, patriarchy, or oppression, right? So we've been consumed by this social justice narrative that I've been railing against for forever, while still playing cards to the fact that we don't want to enable white supremacists. But you got to understand that the social justice warriors are just the alt-right of the left. That's all it is. It's reactionaries to reactionaries. It's reactions and everybody's a reactionary nowadays, it just seems. Right? And so now we have this cause and effect where libertarians are playing into the Republican Party's hands. They're playing into their hands. We could have destroyed the Republican Party this year. And Trump supporters knew this. That's why Roger Stone wanted Gary Johnson. That's why the establishment, that's why Trump and all those people, they wanted Gary Johnson. You know why? Because they knew Gary was a pushover. Because they knew Gary could get slapped around. And because they knew that Bill Weld was going to go out and shill for Hillary, causing more people to vote for Trump. Listen, if you don't like me, that's fine. You can't please everyone, and you shouldn't try. But what I wanted to do when I ran for president this year was to show libertarians how it's done. How to go from zero to hero. You can run fantastic national campaigns with broad appeal, get major endorsements, big airtime, on a limited budget. But what you cannot do is try and convince your fellow constituents that you are ready to lead if you do not have the charisma, the character, and the persona, and the gravitas that is required to lead. Leaders have certain traits, okay? Very rarely do you meet someone who is like a Mother Teresa or Gandhi type, someone who is that sort of like severe pacifist, perhaps, who will lead a movement. It does happen, but that is not the norm. True leadership requires strength. It requires courage. And Gandhi and still had many of those traits. And a lot of his rhetoric was militant, and he had his flaws as well. But you have got libertarians. We despise leaders, right? We don't want leaders. But the problem is that when we try and push leaders forth, they represent what we want, like a sage, a learned hand, or a sad sack prophet philosopher who lives in the woods and posts memes of themselves on Facebook all day and rants against the state. And somehow we feel as if this sort of masturbatory practice is going to advance our cause. You don't win battles fighting in your own people, really. You don't advance ground that way. As a matter of fact, all you do is you lose ground, because in the battle that you have to fight, which sometimes you have to fight internal struggles as a party, we as the Libertarian Party, we're going through that kind of a struggle right now to define ourselves. I mean, one might argue that Johnson not getting 5% may be a good thing for the Libertarians, because one, there isn't the financial incentive for some other GOP or former DNC hack to come in and try and run for the nomination just because they want the $10 million that would be coming through the federal taxation. And then two, the argument that we don't want to encourage bake the cake, effete social justice warrior libertarianism, right? Now, I'm not even a right winger. A lot of people are like, Austin, you're a conservative. You're a conservative. I've always rejected the label of a conservative. Just because I don't want to kill the babies does not make me a conservative. It means that I have respect for all human life. My policy perspective is different from my political perspective of how I present myself, but the reason I arrive at my policies is because of reason. Now, if you cannot communicate to the American people how you arrive at your policies in a way that is social, that is acceptable, well then don't be a libertarian advocate. Certainly don't run for office. Don't waste our frickin' time. I'm sick to death of vanity campaigns, people who run for office with no plans to win, who don't want to do the hard work. And that's really my biggest chastisement. I got a conversation this morning with someone who wants to run as a libertarian in Missouri. They wanted some campaign advice. You know what my campaign advice was to them? Be ready to sit down and do the hard work yourself. Do you know that when I started my campaign 1 year ago today, do you know what I was doing? Mailing bumper stickers, making phone calls to raise money, sometimes at $5 a pop. Calling up radio stations, calling up friends, doing everything that I could, setting up my own website, doing all the merchants stuff with PayPal so that I could make sure that we could, raise some money to do different things here and there. And as I raised more money, I became able to do more things, and I could hire more people and I could do more. But you know what? I see too many libertarians are not willing to do the hard work. So hard work should come first. Okay? And the message can start to get crafted once you have your campaign infrastructure in place and you're ready to go. Of course, this is if you're running for office. But if you're trying to be just a celebritarian or a leader, please, guys, just do your homework first, okay? We've got enough 15-year-old YouTube stars who 6 months later go from supporting Ted Cruz to supporting Bernie Sanders to now back to supporting Trump. Okay, just get your shit together, libertarians. I don't know really how much else I really need to put this other than get your stuff together. And the problem with someone like me is that because I'm willing to sacrifice some of the political capital that I built up by discussing these issues with you, because I want a leaner, meaner libertarian movement. Listen, we are not just. Oh, we got 3%. We got 4 million votes this time. Okay, great. Well, we got 2 million social democrats who aren't going to support us in the future if they get Bernie Sanders. Great. So thanks for bringing on the Bernie bros, because as soon as we have someone who's not a socialist, who's not a bake the cake social justice warrior libertarian in the future, which by God we hope we get, then Those voters are gone. So what exactly are we doing if we cannot build an elite fighting force of true libertarians who can advance this message? There has to be some balance between pragmatism and practical politics, but the problem is that our pragmatists aren't really pragmatists. They're just sellouts. They're not really being pragmatic, okay? If you think that you're being pragmatic because you nominated a former governor to run against someone who understands the media, I mean, John McAfee would have been objectively a better choice. Because John McAfee, while not understanding our political principles from an intellectual perspective, embodies them throughout his life, still would have been a better messenger. And you know me, I do tend to fall on the more pragmatic side of things. Right? I still think that there was a third way. There was a better way. And isn't it so ironic that all Bill Weld wanted to do was stop Trump? And yet his candidate was all they did was help Hillary. I mean, they wanted to stop Trump, so they did help Hillary, but they didn't help Hillary enough because many of people who were supporting Johnson went to Trump. So it seems counterintuitive. If Weld wanted to stop Trump, he should have supported my candidacy. Oh, God. Guys, we got a lot to think about. Now, let's talk about, here's the thing. Social justice warriors bake the cake. There's no future for that in the libertarian movement, okay? I stand up for gay rights, okay? But that means I believe in separation of marriage and state. There are true left libertarian positions that are libertarian positions that don't go off the reservation and forcing freedom of association, getting rid of freedom of association, or just baseless attacks on religion because you hate religion. Listen, I get it, but the problem is that too many of my fellow secularists hate religion so much that they are in many ways are willing to push aside the liberties of our fellow Americans who don't agree with us. Cannot do it. All right, so let's continue here. So the problem with Donald Trump, of course, is that, he's picking neocons to be in his cabinet. I mean, what do you expect here? Ron Paul is saying to Trump, don't listen to the neocons. Adam Dick writes on antiwar.com that Paul says he's keeping his fingers crossed regarding Trump's potential foreign policy actions. He said he views Trump's comments in the presidential elections about being less confrontational with Russia as favorable, and criticizing some of the wars in the U.S. the U.S. wars in the Middle East. Paul, though, notes that Trump has presented vague foreign policy positions overall. No kidding. Paul also comments that a good indication how Trump will act on foreign policy issues will be provided by looking at who Trump appoints to positions in the executive branch and from whom Trump receives advice. And we know who that's going to be. Reince Priebus, Newt Gingrich, Rudy Giuliani, and, of course, Mr. Steve Bannon. So, does that mean that we should be optimistic or we shouldn't be optimistic about Trump? I'm going to wait and see, to be honest. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, is that I think it's unwise to judge someone's actions before they take any actions. We'd like to see what Trump says. He looks like he's backtracking a little bit on things like Obamacare. He's backtracking a little bit on what he's going to overturn. He's backtracking even a little bit on the wall. He's backtracked a little bit on a full ban on deportation of Muslims or ban on Muslims from terrorist countries. And then, of course, that disappeared from his campaign website before it moved back onto his website when the media noticed. But what do we expect from Donald Trump? I mean, we never knew what his policy positions were. They've always been all over the map. My argument was that Trump was saying what he thinks the American people wanted to hear in order to get elected. And then, of course, once he gets elected, we had to pass the Donald to find out what was in it. And we don't know. Because quite frankly, some of the things that Donald proposes sound pretty good. One of the things he's pushed was for every regulation that we pass, two old regulations, have got to be removed. That's the kind of thing I like to hear. Of course, some libertarians are happy that the talk of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, most likely will be shelved. I'm a little bit on the fence on the TPP issue, partly because I don't quite understand all of the basic aspects of it, but I want to, so that way I want to make sure that I am completely honest there, as objective as possible. I can't say whether or not I know for sure if the TPP is a good or bad thing. I know there's had some bad aspects. It had some good aspects. That's most what any legislation is. I mean, it's not like you're going to get a clearly worded constitutional amendment out of this Congress, and at least not any time soon. When's the last time we had a good constitutional amendment? I'll tell you. It's what, the 14th? Was the 14th Amendment the last good constitutional amendment? Maybe. No, probably the one that repealed prohibition would have been a good one as well, of course. So we could debate that all day long. But for libertarians, for Trump, I mean, I'm going to wait and see. And you know what, guys? Your candidate won. So you, in some sense, you deserve the benefit of the doubt. This election was about culture. That is one that this libertarian ticket was completely ill-suited to debate. This was a culture war. This was about social justice warriors versus the alt-right. That's what this election was about. I mean, Gary Johnson might have gotten attention. He could have just had a press conference that talked about the alt-right, just like Hillary did. I don't care if you bashed him. You know, he probably would have been a mistake. But you know what? The truth is that would have showed that Gary had his finger on the pulse. But no, we didn't have our fingers on the pulse this election. We presented a centrist ticket that shilled for Hillary and did nothing but help Trump get elected, which was so ironic because that was the complete opposite of what the ticket wanted. You know, because it was quite clear that the worst thing in the world to Gary and Bill were that Donald Trump might get elected. Well, here we are. Trump got elected. Anyways, listen, I could go on all day about this. I got a lot of work to do today, ladies and gentlemen. I should be doing my live stream tonight. It's doing my live streams on YouTube. This is the video live streams. So if you don't know, I'm going to be doing my this one is live. This is an audio version that you're listening to live. But if you want to watch my video live streams with the studio, then that's going to be at 8 p.m. Central Time. I've been doing those Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Central Time on my YouTube page. Go to youtube.com/AugieP. Augie P, that's me. That's my nickname. If you don't know, the name Austin comes from St. Augustine. So my friends call me Augie. Augie P. A-U-G-G-Y-P. Not A-U-G-G-I-E. No. A-U-G-G-Y-P. So go to youtube.com/A-U-G-G-Y-P. You'll find me. All my videos hosted there at thelibertarianrepublic.com. Give us a subscribe if you don't mind. And, of course, if you like thelibertarianrepublic.com, you visit us every single day, as well as our sister site, the lovely Liberty Laura running libertyviral.com. Thanks very much, and have a fantastic day, my fellow libertarians.